Hello? Hello, hello? Hello? Did you ever experience the following situation? Right before you fall asleep, suddenly a great idea pops into your head. You think, oh, this is amazing, I'm gonna build this into my story. And then you drift off into the sweet world of dreams. Next morning you wake up and you have forgotten absolutely everything. You might not even remember that you forgot. That's what happens if you don't write down your ideas. Or if you have a shitty memory like me. And to make sure those things don't happen, you have to outline your story. When I Just a Good Girl, I didn't have a script for the first few chapters. But then I got older and then my memory started getting more selective about the things to keep in. Remember that shitty song you heard last night? Or how Bear Grylls ate the caterpillar? Ugh, so disgusting. Yeah, we're gonna remember that for the rest of our lives. And not the vocabulary we learned for the test. I had to start writing everything down to make sure I don't forget any important stuff. And now I forget the names of my characters if I don't write them down. Actually, having an outline doesn't only help you with not forgetting stuff. It helps you keeping an overview, making sure you have no plot holes, and just helps you filling the gaps between all the important scenes. What is an outline exactly? Well, it's kind of like drawing. When you draw a figure, first you start with a very rough outline of the whole shape, just to make sure the proportions are right and the drawing is well balanced and dynamic. At this stage it's pretty easy to adjust things. And once you have it, it makes the whole process a lot less scary because you basically know what is where. And it's pretty much the same with the story outline. You roughly plan out the plot of your story, and once you have done that, you can fill in all the details. It is especially important to outline your project if you are writing a longer story, which involves a lot of characters and world building. For a rather simple love story with only 3 characters, you don't really need a lot of planning. And short stories need a different kind of storytelling altogether. But that's a different topic. Outlining can be harder for some people because they don't like to plan. They write their stories simply by, well, sitting down and writing their stories. They just see where they get. And when they write, suddenly an idea might pop up in their head and then they just follow this idea, letting everything develop naturally. Their story might take a turn. Thus, those writers quite often tend to get surprised by their own story and by their own characters. Once they stumble upon a certain idea, they might retract their process and change some things in their already written chapters. And sometimes they even have to change the whole story. This kind of writing might work if you are writing a book or if you write your whole story in detail before you start drawing. But this process is a little bit difficult if you are drawing a longer manga or comic, because changing a drawn chapter is so much more difficult than changing a written one. If it takes you, let's say, 1 month to finish a chapter, and with 1 month I'm being really generous, and you have to change it later because your story took a different path, well, it's gonna be really difficult. You will either have to try and twist your story in a way that still fits everything, or sometimes people start their story anew. And I've seen this happening a lot on the Jinji sites. I don't know whether anyone is actually still doing this, like just starting their story completely anew again. Actually it still happens. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it still happens. And you're like, okay, fine, I mean the art will be better and the story will probably be better. But then it happens again. They start the story again and it gets harder each time to relate to the characters because they're different every time. Anyways, you're not doing your readers any favors by doing this. Worst case scenario, they will abandon your story altogether, and you don't want that. Please, please be considerate of your readers. I got my heart broken so many times because people never finished the story but started it again and again. Another problem that might occur is the following. You start drawing a story, then there are some interesting plot twists, and your story develops pretty nicely. But then you have to draw the ending, and you have no idea how to resolve everything. And the reader can recognize that too, if the ending is a bit too rushed or doesn't really make sense. You might say, but I just wanna start drawing my story. If I write everything down first, then I will never start. And that's kind of a valid point, depending on how long it takes you to write the story. But you don't have to have everything planned out in detail. That's why a story outline is so important. Like I said before, it takes time to draw a chapter. So if you have your story rough planned out and you know where it's going and what will be the main plot points, then you can start drawing, like let's say the first chapter, and while you're drawing that, you can plan out the other chapters in detail. But for that, you need to know where the story is going. Be honest to yourself. Do you know how your story is going to develop or end? Do you have a plan, or do you just want to draw certain scenes? If you started the story having only one character or just a certain scene in mind and nothing else, then the chances are high that you won't feel motivated enough to finish the story. And this leads us to the most important point of having a story outline, in my opinion. If you want to finish your story, you need to have a goal in mind. Once you have outlined your story and you just know about how long it's gonna be and where it's gonna head and what kind of things are going to happen, it takes away the fear of even starting your project. Because it can be really intimidating to think about a whole project that might take you a long time and you are still unsure what it's gonna look like. Believe me, I know how scary it can be to start a project. Hell, pretty much every page in my manga is a fight against my own comfort zone. So I don't need like this dread of having to think of an ending that I don't have figured out yet. So it just lets me sleep quieter at night if I know, okay, this is how my story is gonna end. The only thing I have to figure out is how to get there. No, just kidding. I think I know what I'm gonna do. So now that we know why it is important to outline your story, here are some tips on how to actually do it. First, create an environment without distraction. Don't wait for the muse to come. The muse is a moody bitch. If you write your story only when you feel inspired, then you might never finish it. Or you will finish it when you're 87, depending on the length of your story. Of course, if you feel like writing your story, then seize the moment, because those moments are very valuable. But if you don't feel like it, you still have to write. Go somewhere where you can get distracted by this, or this. Interesting. It can be a library or a cafe. Tell yourself that you have to stay there for, let's say, 3 hours, and you can go before that time. And then you just start working. Just write down whatever. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get into it, and this is why you need the kind of environment where you can't get distracted, because this time to get into it, this is the time where you get yourself distracted very easily. So just write everything down, and some ideas might be very generic and just nothing special. Still, write them down. It's completely fine, because you can change things at any point at this stage. If you bring yourself in this kind of environment, in my experience, I tend to have some breakthroughs, some good ideas that bring the story forward. It might only be 2 or 3 things, but they are really valuable and they are worth it. Your story is worth the time if you want it to be good. 2. Find a method that works best for you and that you find most enjoyable. You can use this 3x structure to figure out the main plot points and then fill in everything in between those plot points. You can use your computer, or you can write down everything in a notebook. Or you can just start writing it down like a story, like a book, let's say, and then divide it into chapters later, whatever works best for you. What has worked well for me are flashcards. On each flashcard I write down some scenes, arcs, or sometimes even just some quotes I want to build into the story, and then I organize them into a chronological order. While doing this, I also go through my random notes that I have collected, and these random notes are my third point. Collect random ideas in between. Whenever an idea pops up into your head, write it down. Can be on your phone or notebook, whatever is best for you, or whatever you have at hand. If you write it down in a cafe on a napkin, just make sure you don't throw away the napkin by accident, but like keep it in order to transfer the idea to somewhere else. Literally stick to every single idea. My collection is a mess. It's disorganized, it's not chronological, and lots of it I can't even read properly anymore. But when I go through these notes, sometimes I think like, oh, wait, that's a great idea. It's interesting and it makes sense. Then again, sometimes I think like, ugh, really? But that's just a natural part of the process. Not every idea you will have is a good idea. So when I outline my story, I go through these notes and then I see what can I use at what point in the story, when can I explain certain world building parts at what point, so it is most natural to the flow of the story. And this alone already fills in a lot of gaps. And it also helps you making sure you don't forget anything important. Number 4, keep it flexible. Once you have outlined your story, you don't have to stick to it like to your Bible. It's only there for giving you a direction. Don't be a slave to your outline, let the outline be your slave. If some things need changing, change them. Having the freedom of not having to stick to a strict script, that's mouthful, makes the whole process just a little bit more enjoyable, and it leaves some room for maybe some better ideas popping up later. 5. A life of its own. So now you have planned out everything and your characters meet certain choices. But then you notice, wait, would this character actually make this choice? Would it make any sense for them to make this kind of choice? If something would be too unnatural for a character, don't do it. Either something happens to force your character to make this choice, or they will make a different decision altogether. Characters should have priority in almost any story. Don't make them act unnatural to their own character. And number 6. You can use similar methods for every chapter. First you plan it out roughly, and then you fill in all the details. In the next episode I will be talking about writing the script. So basically the step after the outlining. So all the detailed work. And this is it. Honestly, I haven't even finished outlining another me to a point where I think I have thought of literally everything. When I started drawing the first chapter, I knew how the story would end and I knew some major plot points, but nothing really beyond that. I was still missing a lot of characters and I changed a lot of things while I was drawing this first chapter. Will it affect the story? It already did. I actually brought myself into a tricky situation with this first chapter because I was stubborn and wanted the story to start the way it starts, even though in some points it didn't make any sense. So don't follow my example, ever. Still, by trying to resolve these problems that I created for myself, I kind of came up with some solutions that made the whole world a little bit more interesting and gave the plot a little bit more depth, I think. So if you already drew a lot of chapters and then notice that something is off, try to think of solutions. How can you still resolve it? It might take some time, but it's tons better than starting your story again from the very beginning. So noticing some mistakes later is not the end of the world. And remember, if you have an outline, then chances of this happening are reduced by a lot. So this was a long talk about stuff that you should do that I don't always do myself. And this episode was more for myself than for anyone else, I guess. Thanks to everyone who watched this. Even if you're not a story writer, I hope that you could take something away from it. If you found this video somewhat interesting, then I would like you to press the thumbs up button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, then now the chance to do so. Whee! Originally I was trying to upload a video every 2 weeks, but it turns out to be pretty difficult because it takes a while and I'm just slow. So I don't even know when the next video will come up, but I try my best to make it as quickly as I can. Thank you for watching. Bye!